This one isn't your typical demonic possession movie. Early today, I went to go see the first showing of Nefarious. Today was its first showing. There was no Thursday preview. Otherwise, I would have done a double feature yesterday when I went to go see The Pope's Exorcist. It was funny because both of these movies deal with demonic possession, that type of genre. When I went to go see this, and I only found out about this film through Cinemark, the Cinemark app, because it lists different movies that are upcoming. I didn't watch a trailer about it. I didn't know anything about who was behind it. I had only seen it showed that Sean Patrick Flannery was in here. That was the only name I recognized. As far as involvement with the story, didn't know the director, didn't know the writer. Like I said, I found out stuff later. I found out who the writer was and the director. I don't think I've ever seen anything the director did. But anyway, so I found out later the different people that were involved in it, and maybe to some folks that would serve as a deterrent or as an attraction. I don't know. For me, it didn't really make a ton of difference upon finding out. I went to see this thinking that it was going to be very similar to The Pope's Exorcist. It was not. In fact, this particular movie is quite different. Probably one of the more unique, if not the most unique, demonic possession type of film that I've seen. It is not action-packed. There's not like a lot of gore, violence and stuff. It's mostly confined to one room. There are scenes that take place outside of this room, but the bulk of this film takes place in this one room. I would describe this movie more as I think Sean Patrick Flannery described it as a psychological drama. I would describe it as a psychological horror, or there's a lot of verbal sparring that goes on in this film. And I haven't been able to get it out of my mind ever since I saw it, because it's hard to pigeonhole this type of thing. If you don't like demonic possession types of films, and they're not my favorite genre, as I said in the review for The Pope's Exorcist, it's easy to just kind of, dismiss the film outright. And especially if you're not a believer in religion, or specifically in Christianity, definitely I could see, that this probably wouldn't be a film for you. But at the same time, there are aspects about it that I really appreciated, and the messaging in here, whether you're a believer or not, I feel like there were some very valid points made about society, good versus evil, the evil that society allows itself to accept and to embrace without even really fully realizing that it's evil. Now, you could get into a lot of really deep discussion about how evil is just a social construct. That was mentioned in here. Various narratives were touched upon here, and so anyway, it was different. It was different. I appreciated that about it, and I really, despite the fact that there wasn't a lot of action in here, and this isn't really an action-y story, and it's not your typical horror story, I was engaged the entire time. I wasn't bored one moment. And so I wrote a crap ton of notes, a lot of notes, which I am not going to probably mention because it gets a little bit into spoilery territory, which I don't want to do if you're interested to watch it. And if you're not interested to watch it, but you want to find out more about it, you can always do what I do. Go to Wikipedia and read the summary. If you have zero interest in taking the time to watch something, but you are curious to find out how it played out, yeah, just do the Wikipedia. Just do what Cyn does. No, I'm not the only person who does it. Anyway, so the synopsis of this film is: there is a guy on death row and a psychiatrist or psychologist. I don't know. I know there's a difference between the two. One has to do with being able to prescribe meds, the other doesn't, whatever, but one of those types. He is brought in to talk with this guy, and I think that his character's name was Edward. He's brought in to talk with this guy on the day of his execution to determine whether he's sane or not. If he is not sane, the psychiatrist is going to not recommend execution. If he rules or determines that he is sane, then the execution can proceed. This is stuff that is shown in the trailer, and I only know that because I did watch the trailer today after I'd already seen the movie. I really feel like I'm going to get more and more in the habit of not watching trailers before I see films, especially films that I am quite interested in watching. Now, I wasn't necessarily super interested in watching this. In fact, when I went to go see it, I had the highest expectation that it was just going to be kind of meh, and I wouldn't really appreciate it too much. But in an interesting way, I feel like this movie was substantially more weighty than, let's say, The Pope's Exorcist. So even though there were things about Pope's Exorcist that I did appreciate, so it's just really, I feel like I'm just going to kind of go on and on, even though I have notes to sort of keep myself in check. There's just so much that I thought about as I was watching this and inherently felt inside as I was watching this. It's kind of hard to put it in words, and I want to choose my words in a way that will effectively get across what I felt when I watched this film. Anyway, he goes in to talk to this guy, Edward, and Edward says he's possessed by a demon and the demon has full control and all this. So what follows is this lengthy back and forth between, oh gosh, I don't remember the psychiatrist's name. Between the doctor and Edward. And there's this verbal sparring, there's this mental sparring that's going on between them. They get on to topics like theology, good versus evil, demons, hell, heaven, God, the angels, things like that, mental illness. So it reminded me of, now, I was trying to describe this to my brother when I was talking about it with him today, and I mentioned the movie 12 Angry Men. Now, I don't remember if I've ever seen that movie. I might have. If I did, it was in school. But from what I understand, 12 Angry Men takes place in this one room, and it starts off where you are for sure on a particular side of a situation, and then as the story progresses and different things are revealed little by little, and that onion is peeled back more and more and more, things change, situation gets a little bit more muddy and complicated. And it's just interesting to see how a scenario that starts off here and it ends up over here just through the vehicle of dialogue. And I found that pretty interesting, and I felt like it was handled really well. Something about it was very compelling to me. I liked it. I liked also some of the messaging in here talking about the evil that society embraces in general, that it's gradual. It's a gradual progression of certain things. Granted, you can slap the label evil on something that maybe another person might not feel is evil, but the point is just like, in general, society gradually changes, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. And these changes, especially ones for the worst, and even ones for the better, but like, let's say ones for the worst, it's not something that happens overnight. It's something it's little by little. It happens in degrees or stages. So that's why it can kind of sneak up on you without you realizing it. And then, as was mentioned in here, you have a societal decay in certain ways, and the embracing of evil, or bad behavior or bad things, that being embraced or even given accolades, things that you really can't easily fundamentally attach huge positives to. And a lot of these different things can be hot button topics. and very divisive sort of topics. And you have people on each side that feel very strongly about it. They're very grounded in like they're not going to budge. And then you have certain people in the middle that feel pretty torn because you can see aspects of each side, maybe agree with some, disagree with others, but there's this really muddy area in between, and sometimes it's hard to form a really firm opinion about something because things are so complicated. And it's just, I found this a pretty thought-provoking film, and I don't think that it's anything that's going to change the mind of some people who believe a certain way, think a certain way. Like, let's say if you're an atheist and you watch this movie, you're not necessarily going to maybe buy into what's being said. It's not going to necessarily change your mind. In fact, you might outright hate this film because though it starts off not being so heavy-handed in its theme of Christianity, by the time the movie's done, it's very clear, very, very clear that this is a Christianity faith-based film. It comes from that perspective, and that's the narrative that's definitely being pushed here. So if you have a problem with stuff like that, you probably aren't going to like a whole lot about this film. If you go into it just trying to sort of disregard or not maybe take seriously the messaging of that, maybe you'll appreciate just the way the dialogue carries out in here. Anyways, you know, it's hard to say. I mean, I feel like that in a lot of ways, faith-based films, they don't really, well, I feel like a lot of times they kind of miss the mark because the way stories play out in movies like this, it doesn't feel like it works very well. In some movies, it can, like the movie Cyns, which is primarily about faith, the lack of faith and the restoration of faith. And that worked because while that's kind of the foundation of the story, it's wrapped up in something that can appeal to many people across the board. And so this gets started off feeling that way in a sense, but then, like I said, by the end of it, it's super clear that it's this is what it is. And so if that's the sort of thing you're not comfortable with, I can see that you probably wouldn't really care too much for the story. Anyway, I'm going to just look through. I've kind of gone through mostly the pros, but oh yes, okay, more pros I wanted to talk about. I already talked about society embracing evil little by little, not even being able to recognize evil when it's right in front of your face. I feel like in a lot of ways, I don't think that's anything necessarily new, but it feels like it's more in your face, and as far as like that sort of thing. And it also feels like there's a ton of gaslighting that is being done to people who try to speak out against certain things that's just so obviously messed up in all sorts of ways. And you've got these mind games that are being played. This movie addresses stuff like that. Not quite as blatantly as you might think, but it does feel like it's tackling that sort of situation that is happening, especially these days, especially because social media makes it so much more prevalent, or feels like it's so much more prevalent than maybe it used to be half a century ago. So more pros. Sean Patrick Flannery, his performance in here, I thought was very good. He was distracting to me in the beginning, especially because, well, I mean, it remained that way constantly because his body language, his facial expressions, and his tics, like he would have these different facial tics that he would do with his mouth, his tongue, and with his eyes, and it got very like I was just like wanting to do like this. It got really distracting. I think that was obviously that was intentional, but it was unsettling. It made me feel like it just made me feel it was disturbing. And that was the intent, and he did a really good job at that. So kudos to him. I feel like this was probably one of his strongest performances, because he could shift from one personality to the other at the drop of a hat, and the voice changed, the personality changed, the body language changed. It was convincing, and you knew it when it happened, and you didn't need voice effects to make the sound of a demon voice to convince you that there was some very disturbing stuff that was going on inside this character. So I appreciated that. Something else I also appreciated, some consistency. I'll give you an example. There's something that happens with his finger, and then later, this thing that happened with his finger, if it had happened in real life, it would have some pretty terrible bruising, and it did show that terrible bruising. Even by the time I saw the bruising, I had forgotten what happened to the finger, but that was there, and I noticed it, and I noticed it and appreciated it to the point that I wrote it down. Oh, there was something else that was mentioned in here that I thought was kind of funny. I wrote down what I think was the exact quote, and I believe it was, one of the characters said, sometimes smart people have trouble believing things everybody else knows. And I think that was probably sort of a direct commentary on, you know, how you have people in the general population, let's say, we all know something to be a certain way. Like, we all understand the basics about certain things, but then you have other, like, let's say, intellectual types that, and this is just in general, obviously, seem to portray this feeling that they think they're so much smarter than the rest of us because of their education, and because they know this and because they know that. But sometimes they're so blinded by what they think they know because of their intellect, they don't see something that all of the rest of us can very clearly see. And I thought that was an interesting comment. There's a lot of digs at certain mindsets in here. This film might ruffle certain feathers, and I could see why that would be the case. Okay, moving on to what I feel like were cons about the film. Like I said, this is fundamentally a faith-based movie. This is ultimately telling people what they want to hear. That's not necessarily a con, because this happens in a lot of different stories. It tries to take this sort of balanced approach to various issues through the narrative that each of these characters is telling or talking about. But this is fundamentally something that is going to be preaching to the choir. I don't think it's going to change anybody's minds, and I don't know, maybe that's not the intent. Maybe the intent is just to say this thing. So that's not necessarily a con, it's just an observation. But I liked, for the most part, how it was carried off, even though I can recognize that it's not anything that's going to be so profound that we're going to suddenly have people change their mind about certain things. Also, it felt like there were moments where talking points were being addressed, different phrasings and subjects that were mentioned, you know, and it addressed them all. Slavery, racism, hate speech. And sometimes the messaging of that, it felt a bit heavy-handed. And by that I mean, it felt clunky in its execution. It wasn't something that was carried off smoothly, and the transition into that particular portion of the dialogue between these two characters, it didn't happen smoothly. It felt like there was this, oh, okay, we need to say this, so let's say this right here. And it didn't feel like it was an organic flow into that part of the discussion. So that kind of stood out to me. Sometimes the protagonist's actions didn't make a lot of sense to me. I kept thinking to myself, he could just do this thing and leave and be done right now. Why doesn't he just do this? And so that, but obviously if he had done that, there would be no more story. I get it. But I guess I feel like when those moments happened, it seemed like there was some piece missing to make it a little bit more convincing that he had decided. I mean, they did a pretty solid job at getting you there, or at getting his character there, but it felt like there were places where, why wouldn't he just walk out now? Why wouldn't he just be done with it? So I definitely noticed that. And also there were two things that happened in here that made me write it down, because I was like, wait, what? There's a scene where someone's life is put in danger. And I was thinking to myself, why aren't the guards doing anything? Because don't they have guns? They could deal with the situation right then and there because of the way the people were positioned. And then I found out, well, guards inside a prison, they don't carry guns in general, like the guards outside, but the ones inside doing the patrolling, they don't. I didn't really realize that. So anyway, that sort of did away with an issue that I thought I had with one particular scene, but that very thing came back around at the end when there's a particular room that people are in and someone has a gun, and there's no way in the world that would have happened in this particular room. And then the events that played out because of that, to me, they weren't as weighty, or they didn't really have that oomph to it that I think it was supposed to have, because the logical part of me was like, this would not ever be possible. This makes no sense. This would not happen in this room. So the very sort of thing that made me so frustrated with the stuff in John Wick was happening here in that particular scene. And so I felt like that was just not handled very well. While I get that you're supposed to have this character end up in a particular situation and this thing to happen, the way they got you there, it didn't work for me. So that really jumped out at me as something that belonged in the con territory. Not that I necessarily disliked how things ended up. I'm just saying the way they got the character there, that just wasn't something. I feel like that should have happened somewhere else, not within this particular area that it happened. But I'm being super vague because I'm trying to avoid spoilers. But anyway, those are my very long-winded thoughts about Nefarious. It's not what I expected. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think this is something that will probably bounce around in my brain for a while. I probably won't really ever forget this film because of how interesting I found the dialogue progression in this story. Now, I know it's based on a book, but as Sean said in an interview I watched, he did an interview with Eric July, and I listened to it today. He was saying how the book is very different from the movie. They changed the screenplay is totally different. I don't know that I'm going to ever read the book. I just know that I knew afterwards, after I saw the film, that this was based on a book. So I'm not quite sure that this issue that I had with this scene that I'm referring to was something that played out at all in the book. But yeah, that definitely presented itself as a problem to me. And so, yeah, I think that's it. I think that's everything. Anyway, I don't think this film's going to get a huge ton of buzz. And I don't think it's going to be something huge at the box office. But if you guys do end up watching it by chance, I am interested to hear what you think. Like if you came away from it with the same perceptions that I did, or if you had no problem at all with some of the things that kind of stuck out to me as issues, or if you just hated it outright. I think that the film's going to be, it's going to be maybe divisive depending on who watches it. But anyway, it made me think. I appreciated that about it. I really appreciated Sean's performance. I thought this was, like I said, some of the best acting I've ever seen him do. And I really liked him in The Dead Zone. I thought he was very good in that. But in here, he really showed his range to me. And yeah, I thought he did an excellent job in here. Everyone was fine. The guy who played the doctor, this dude, I don't think I've ever seen him before. Or if I have, I didn't notice him as an actor. I thought he was very good in here too. I liked the way he played his character's part. No complaints as far as that goes. Okay. I think that's it. I got nothing else, so I'm calling it quits. Later, guys.